For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. At least 21 people are dead from Russian airstrikes in Kherson, Ukraine, which reportedly hit residential and commercial buildings, including a supermarket. Explosions were also reported in Zaporizhia, and attacks also hit Kiev. No injuries reported there. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for the criminal prosecution of Russian President Vladimir Putin. He spoke at The Hague during a visit to the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands.
We all want to see different Vladimir here in The Hague. The one who deserves to be sentenced for these criminal actions right here in the capital of the international law. And I'm sure we will see that happen when we win, and we will win.
The ICC has filed war crimes charges against Putin and a high-level official over its war in Ukraine. Zelensky's comments come a day after he denied Ukrainian forces were responsible for what the Kremlin called an attempted assassination of Putin using a drone attack. Moscow's also blaming the U.S. The U.S. also denies involvement. Fighting continues in Sudan, where a growing humanitarian crisis has sent more than 100,000 people fleeing for refuge to neighboring countries in the Horn of Africa region. Despite a 7-day ceasefire agreement reached, there are reports of bombed hospitals and looting of food aid. Christopher Martinez has more.
Toby Harward is with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, says the problem could get much worse.
We are working on the assumption that if the conflict continues to deteriorate, we'll be looking at a planning figure of potentially up to 800,000 refugees crossing borders. So a very, very serious, widespread humanitarian response will be required.
Harward noted a report that 17,000 tons of supplies have been looted from World Food Programme and other UN supplies in Sudan.
Uncontrolled militias, bandits, criminals. Some of them are loosely affiliated with one of the two sides of the conflict.
Harward was speaking from Nairobi, Kenya, where many agencies have set up what they call back offices until they can return to Sudan. Meanwhile, Martin Griffiths, UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief, was in Port Sudan to meet with aid workers and local leaders. He's trying to work out safe passage for humanitarian aid workers and supplies.
Even when there is no formal national ceasefire, we will still require agreements and arrangements to allow for movement of staff and supplies.
I'm Christopher Martinez.
A new UN report says about 258 million people in 58 nations faced acute food insecurity last year, a major increase over the previous year. Jill Martell has more.
The global report on food crisis said people faced starvation and death in 7 of those countries, including Somalia, Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, Haiti, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen. Arif Hussein is the chief economist at the UN World Food Programme.
Before COVID, we had about 135 million people in 53 countries. Today, 258 million people in 58 countries. So you can just see that food insecurity has almost doubled.
He also said that the food insecurity has been felt worse in the poorest countries, which are dependent on food imports. According to the report, the crisis is due to multiple factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and Russia's war in Ukraine. I'm Gilles Martel.
The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to the highest level in 16 years. It's the 10th rate hike since March of last year, raising interest to about 5% and above on loans and credit debt. Catherine Carley reports.
The Federal Reserve has raised its key interest rate by a quarter point to the highest level in 16 years. And Chairman Jerome Powell says regulators have yet to decide if today's hike will be the last.
My colleagues and I understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal.
Powell says it's essential Congress raise the nation's debt limit to avoid a default. Lawmakers have until June 1st to strike a deal. I'm Catherine Carley for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
More details have emerged about the gifts and monies Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his family received from billionaire megadonor Harlan Crow. That's been at the heart of calls for tougher ethics standards for the high justices. ProPublica's reporting Crow has also paid for the private school tuitions of Thomas's nephew, who Thomas has raised to the tune of more than $100,000 that also went unreported. Crow also had partial ownership of a company with a legal case before the Supreme Court that points to a conflict of interest. Thomas did not recuse himself from the case. And today marks day 3 of a strike by Hollywood writers that have forced many TV shows to air reruns. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.